throw. One-on-one. Davis has it. Touchdown. Carolina wins. Carolina is the Coastal Division champion. Javonte Williams to the left of Howe. He'll send him out into the flat right side. Howe looking, standing tall, lets it go. Man there. Touchdown. Touchdown, Carolina. The pistol. Jackson behind him. Hands off to Jackson. He tried a jump pass, and it's intercepted. Surratt intercepts it. Holy cow, Carolina's going to win. And off to Javonte Williams again. Pops it to the left. Javonte leaps over a man, crosses the 50, trucks over a defender, spins by another. Goodness gracious, he's down to about the 15, and he did absolutely everything in one carry.
Here's the shotgun snap to Aguilar. Drops back. Pressure coming. Aguilar floats it up. Incomplete. No flags. Head on back up the mountain. Carolina wins it in double overtime. Loftus out of the shotgun. Throws to the end zone. Incomplete. Incomplete. The bell belongs to us. Carolina wins it 47-45 in double overtime.
Bernard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Gio at the 35. Gio, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Gio is going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
What's going on, guys? Welcome into another edition of the Heel Tough Blog Podcast, coming at you on a Thursday night as we get you ready for Carolina and Connecticut in the Wasabi Fenway Bowl. That will come at you on Saturday morning at 11 a.m. We're going to go through, give you everything that you need to know for Carolina's matchup against the Connecticut Huskies. Tell you everything about this year's version of the Huskies, a little bit about Carolina's history against them, and of course, focus on everything that is going on around Carolina and what those storylines are heading into the bowl game. We'll also give you a transfer portal update that'll come at the end of the show, where we'll discuss what is going on in the transfer portal. Carolina already with 10 additions in the portal. Which one do we think is the most impactful so far? And, where do we think that Carolina potentially has to go next in the portal with some of the spots that are still open on this roster? We'll talk about all of that. But first, let's begin with a couple of staff additions that Carolina has made within the last few days. So over the weekend, a staff addition that I think we all saw coming. We knew it was going to happen at some point. It was just a matter of when. And it felt like Bill was kind of waiting for his son to, try to get at least towards the end of bowl preparations before he ended up making the hire official. And over the weekend, it was made official that Steven Belichick will be the defensive coordinator for the North Carolina Tar Heels. Makes a lot of sense, reuniting him with his dad. Those two, of course, had plenty of success when they were with New England on that side of the ball. He was one of Bill's top assistants and, eventually became, a guy that was seen as one of the up-and-coming defensive minds. He ends up getting the defensive coordinator job for the Washington Huskies. And, in his first year as a defensive coordinator, had some pretty decent success. This is definitely a guy that you're taking a little bit of a risk on because of the fact that he is so young. He hasn't been a defensive coordinator for long. But when you saw the hire, I don't think anybody is blown away by it. But what are your initial thoughts about Steven Belichick being the defensive coordinator for Carolina?
Yeah, it was the staff addition that we expected from the beginning after Bill Belichick's hire. Makes a lot of sense. We know Bill's going to, surround himself with people that he trusts and people that he's familiar with. The best example of that is his son, who, rose up the rankings on his staff there in New England, and was becoming a guy that, was being thought of as one, maybe the next great defensive minds at the NFL level. Goes to the college route. Did a pretty, admirable job there with Washington, but now he's coming to coach with his dad. and be a part of this thing that he's looking to build at the college level. So I think the most important thing to note is that as far as we know, this does not mean that he's going to be our head coach upon the end of Bill Belichick's career in college. And that's the most important thing because I think that was everyone's biggest drawback to Bill Belichick when the news and the rumors first circulated about him maybe being a legitimate candidate for the job was he going to hold Carolina hostage to make his son the head coach in waiting? It doesn't appear that's going to be, formally documented. Does he get groomed to be that guy? Who knows? We'll have to wait and see how that all plays out. But the good news is that Bill Belichick has a guy that was highly thought of at the NFL level as a defensive mind, had some success at the college level, knows what the college game looks like, albeit doing it in a different conference. But nonetheless, this was a hire that we all expected to happen, and it came to fruition earlier this week.
Yeah, I mean, you like the fact that, the college experience comes in one of the best conferences in the sport. It comes in the most physical conference, some would argue, in the sport. And so I do think that there's a lot that he can take away from his year with Washington, a team that, by the way, for him wasn't easy taking over that group with all that they lost after last year's national championship appearance. For him to come in and take that unit from one of the middling units really in all of college football. I mean, you go back to last year, total defense wise, that group was ranked 99th. So he improved them as a total defensive unit. They finished the year 26th in total defense, improved them in terms of points allowed per game, wasn't nearly as drastic. And there are some games that were certainly concerning. You look at the game against Iowa, that's one that certainly stands out as one that you would hope wouldn't happen, when Carolina faces some of the better opponents in the ACC. But I think you have to look at what he did. And the fact that you're hiring a guy that seems to be trending upward as your defensive coordinator definitely has to feel refreshing, because the last two guys that you brought in here, Jeff Collins, I mean, the last time that we saw him, he was a head coach at Georgia Tech, and it was not going great. He ends up getting fired. Things get turned around by Brent Key there. The guy previous to Jeff Collins was Gene Chizik once again. Last time that Gene Chizik was a defensive coordinator, which was a pretty significant amount of time before he was rehired at Carolina, he was struggling with his defense on the Tar Heel sidelines under Larry Fedora. So I do think that this is refreshing to have a guy that seems like he will head in on some sort of upward trajectory, and that there is reasons to believe in him as a future defensive mind in college football. So I like it. I think you're right. You do wonder, is he going to be groomed for the head coaching job? I would be shocked if he's not being groomed for that, or at least for a head coaching job somewhere in college football. But I mean, look, Carolina fans, I think at this point should really be open to anything. If he is being groomed, then, that's fine. I like the fact, and this is what's different, because people will say, well, why were you complaining when this was first suggested then? This is different than it being a part of the contract. That is a requirement that he is your future your future head coach. Because at that rate, Carolina wouldn't be able to pick. They wouldn't be able to have some sort of legitimate conversation about their next coach or whatever. It would basically already be decided for you. And that's not something that I think Carolina should really want to get in the business of. I don't think that deciding your future this far out really makes a whole lot of sense. And so it doesn't seem like that's part of the deal. And that's why I think you should probably be on board with this addition and really feel good about where this Tar Heel defense could potentially be heading, with him working with his dad, one of the greatest defensive minds of all time. You move to the player personnel department, and Carolina makes another hire there today. Taylor Edwards, who was the former director of player personnel at South Carolina from 2021 to 2024, is brought in as a as a member of the player personnel staff. It is not official as to what his exact title is going to be. But look, this is a guy that has, helped assemble, some really good teams in terms of talent over the last few years at South Carolina. Now, there is, an NCAA violation that led to his resignation prior to the start of this season during the summer at South Carolina, where he was in contact with a player at the college level that was not in the transfer portal yet. And in this era of college football, that is something that we probably, don't see enough violations for. There probably are a lot of guys that are part of player personnel staffs that do end up doing that. And unlike South Carolina, they do not self-report a violation. But that is certainly something that is noticeable. And it's why this hire, while, there is some upside to it, there's also some risk to it as well.
Yeah, it's not what you want, but you can look at his track record and see the success that's there. So hopefully this is a mistake that he learns from, gets cleaned up. And this isn't something we got to deal with, at UNC, because, man, look, the jokes are going to write themselves with Bill Belichick being on the staff already, right? Like, we know what's going to come with the territory, Spygate, Deflategate. I guess now this would be Portalgate if something were to happen under him. But, I also think this is just part of, I'm not trying to make excuses, but and what has become the wild, wild west of college athletics, these coaches were maybe having to adjust to different protocols, and maybe stuff weren't clearly defined, outlined for them as well. Hopefully this won't be a problem moving forward, but this was an example and a reason why so many coaches have called for reform from a portal standpoint, from an NIL standpoint, just because there's so much unknown that allows for these programs to get in trouble. And hopefully with the structure that'll be in place under Belichick and Chapel Hill, it won't be much of an issue moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, the thing to me is that you're hoping that this was a lesson for him. He learned, it could have been the thing that's so tough is you don't know what actually happened with the situation. You'll never actually get the details of what exactly happened. It could have been a player that reached out to him and said, I'm in the portal, or I'm thinking about getting in the portal and I want to talk to you guys. And he simply responded back, and that could be illegal. It's just one of those things that with the newness of the portal, you hope that maybe that was just a mistake. We don't know when it happened as well. It could have been, early in his tenure at South Carolina, and Shane Beamer and his staff just found out about it and decided to self-report it. It could have been one of those, situations where things were a little muddy. Even if it wasn't, this is a guy that has done a great job of helping to assemble some really, really talented rosters at South Carolina. Like, you look at the way that group has taken off recruiting-wise, the success that they've had in the portal the last couple of years. I mean, Spencer Rattler coming out of the portal was a tremendous addition. You look at how they built up this year's team. They did it with a combination of guys from the high school ranks, along with some of those transfers as well. So I think he's a guy that's worth taking a shot on. Look, if something like this ends up happening again, all you got to do the minute that you notice that it happens, self-report it, and you end up forcing him to resign again. And at that point, he probably doesn't get another opportunity. But outside of that moment at South Carolina, he seemed to have a pretty clean track record. He's held a bunch of different spots, director of recruiting at a lot of different places, was a player personnel assistant under Nick Saban at Alabama. I'm assuming that's probably where the link is for Bill Belichick to reach out to him. And so I feel like this is a worthwhile risk for Carolina. Could it end up coming back to bite him? Certainly. But I think if he's a guy that can keep himself clean, this is someone that knows how to amass talent and can help Carolina to do that. And that's ultimately what Carolina is hoping to do with their new staff. But before we get to that, We have one last game, and it will be the first and only game of the Freddie Kitchens era as the head coach at North Carolina. Tar Heels are looking for their first bowl win since 2019. It will be the fourth all-time meeting between the Tar Heels and the UConn Huskies. It'll be the first time, of course, that they are meeting neutral site. The Tar Heels lead the all-time series 3-0. The last time the two teams faced off was a home-and-home series with the Huskies back in 2008, 2009. Of course, with that unblemished record, you know that Carolina won both of those games. So a lot of success for Carolina against Connecticut, but a team that has really, really struggled after that first year under Mac Brown when it's come to winning bowl games. When you look at this year's Connecticut team, it's a team that's 8-4. Now, here's the thing about their record. That would lead you to believe that they are a pretty good team. And I'm not taking anything away from what Jim Mora Jr. has done there. This was an incredibly difficult job after Randy Edsall's first stint in UConn. Those games that we talked about in 2008, 2009, those were very well-regarded UConn teams. Teams that at times were ranked inside of the top 25. Some of them even climbed inside of the top 15. But since that point, things have really taken a dip here, especially since the collapse of the Big East Conference on the football side of things. Connecticut has been independent, and things have been rather rough. Jim Mora Jr.'s kind of gotten it back on track. And this year, while they do have an 8-4 record, the team is 0-4 against Power 4 schools so far this year, including a couple of blowouts. And towards the end of the season, even some of the group of 5 competition that they were playing were giving them some fits. Not exactly the greatest teams either. Teams like UAB, who finished near the bottom of the American Conference, as well as Georgia State, who finished 3-9 this season near the bottom of the Sun Belt Conference, gave them some challenges. Offensively, it's a team that averages 32.3 points per game, 400.7 yards of total offense, 202.3 passing yards, and 198.3 rushing yards. As you can see, the strength of this team is their backfield, but they will be without a significant piece in this game. Darrell Robinson, that's a guy that some people around here may remember. He was a guy that originally committed to Charlotte out of high school, entered the transfer portal, and landed at UConn. Had a really good year this year. 107 carries, 789 yards, and a touchdown. 6.8 yards per carry led the team. He is in the transfer portal and has since signed with the Auburn Tigers, so he will not be active in this game, meaning that Cameron Edwards and Jaden Brown, both guys who have over 575 yards rushing so far this season, they will be handling the bulk of the load there. Still guys that are more than capable of being able to do that in this game. The bigger loss might be at wide receiver, where their leading receiver, Skylar Bell, he has entered the transfer portal as well. He had 47 catches for 783 yards and 4 touchdowns. Outside of him, there's only one receiver who has more than 300 yards receiving this year, and that would be TJ Sheffield, who has 49 catches, the most on the team, 474 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Tight end Lewis Hanson, also worth watching, 22 catches, 230 yards, and 4 touchdowns. He will test the Tar Heel linebackers. Their quarterback spot, kind of, one that was bounced back and forth throughout the year. Joe Fagnano was the team's starter out of the gate. Started the season pretty successfully. Gets banged up in the middle of the season, means Nick Evers has to take over, more of a mobile guy, but turn the ball over at a pretty high rate. Fagnano then takes over again at the end of the regular season for the final 2 games of the year and gets that offense rolling once again. So far this year, Fagnano 1,480 yards passing, 18 touchdowns to just 4 interceptions. So a very accurate season for him. The thing is, just completing 56.8% of his passes. It's not the most efficient quarterback out there. So this will be an interesting test, man. The fact that they don't have one of their key running backs is significant. The fact that they don't have their leading wide receiver is significant, but it still feels like with two really strong running backs in that backfield and a quarterback that has done a good job of taking care of the football this year, Carolina does have to be ready for a bit of a test in this one.
Yeah, these bowl games really come down to who wants it more, and who has more guys available than the other team. Yes, they're missing their top running back, they're missing a top wideout, but you mentioned the depth in the backfield, a quarterback that's been around for a while, and for a program like UConn that is not in a situation to legitimately compete for championships, bowl games do mean something different to that program. And so a win in this bowl game might mean something more than to what it would mean to Carolina, which means there might be a different motivation factor going into this ball game than maybe there would have been otherwise. So I think it'll be interesting just to see kind of how Carolina prepares for them, because I have to imagine that these game plans for these coordinators, they've got to be the hardest game plans to put together all year, because you don't know who's playing for you. You don't know who's playing for your opponent, but you still got a job to do, which is put together a game plan that gives your team a chance to win the ball game. So we know Carolina is going to be down some key pieces on the defensive side of the football, but this is not an offensive juggernaut in UConn that they're going up against, which means we should not see this defense get shredded like we have seen them get shredded in bowl games previously.
Yeah, you would hope not. And a big part of it is that, it depends, I guess, on who plays in the middle for Carolina. That's probably the biggest concern right now. And we'll talk about, the overall look at the roster and who, could be active, who might not be active. But I mean, yeah, the middle of that group, I think, is probably your biggest concern on the defensive line. If a lot of those guys end up playing for Carolina and they're even remotely successful, you've got both of your linebackers that'll be playing in this game. You would expect that Carolina will have some sort of resistance to the run in this one, and that's going to be the most important thing for Carolina. Move over to the defensive side of the ball for UConn. Not as many guys that will be out of this game, which should be an encouraging sign for Jim Moore Jr. and his staff in this one. This is a group that allows 23.8 points per game, 359.1 yards of total offense, 223.8 passing yards per game, and 135.3 rushing yards per game. As I mentioned, though, this was a unit that as the season went along, they started to allow more yards, more points to some less successful teams. And so Carolina hopefully will be able to take advantage of that. Linebacking core, the strength of this unit. You've got Jaden McDonald in the middle, a guy who led the team with 119 total tackles this year, 9 tackles for loss, as well as 3.5 sacks. Alongside of him is Tui Fuamina Brown. He's a guy that leads the team in tackles for loss with 11, has 4.5 sacks, which also leads the team, and did finish with 88 combined tackles this year. The secondary, pretty decent as well. They do have some guys back there that have been really good in run defense, guys like Malik Dixon, Duarte Jones, and Damon Brinson. Biggest issue for them is they do have some guys that give up a lot of yards this season. They have 2 players in this defensive backfield. Cornerback Cam Chadwick, who actually graded out rather well in terms of coverage grade, is 74.3 so far this year, which is pretty good according to Pro Football Focus. But he has allowed 34 receptions for 510 yards and 4 touchdowns this year. Meanwhile, in the middle, Brinson, who we mentioned, he's allowed 564 yards receiving and 6 touchdowns. So certainly guys that Carolina will be looking to attack both on the outside and in the middle of the field. When it comes to the defensive front, this is a unit that was a pretty big strength for most of the year. They do suffer a pretty significant loss in Langston Hardy, the edge rusher, probably the best player on this unit, 4 sacks this year, did have 25 total pressures, which was the most of anybody on the team, so they will have to make an adjustment there. But they do like the guy, Javon Banks, who was opposite of Hardy down the stretch of the season. Has missed a decent amount of tackles for a guy on the edge, but did have 12 total pressures to go along with 2 sacks this season. So certainly a group that will test Carolina, especially on the offensive line. And those edge rushers could be really key going up against probably Luke Masterson, who will likely be the starter for Carolina at left tackle with Howard Sampson gone to Texas Tech in the transfer portal.
Yeah, and so you look at their defense. There's nothing that doesn't lead you to believe that Carolina can't move the ball. There's nothing to lead you to believe that Carolina can't put points on the board. It really comes down to what a rebuilt offensive line is going to look like against a defensive line that has capable guys of getting pressure. And from what we know of Jacoby Criswell, the back third of the season was a lot like what we saw from Drake May the previous 2 years, which was once this offensive line crumbled around him, so did he. And this offense just was not what it was during that 3-game winning streak that got the team in a position to make a bowl game. They put up points against NC State in the finale, but they really all came in the second half and really all came in bunches. And that was after a disastrous performance against Boston College the week prior. So, you mentioned you're going to have a different guy starting out there at left tackle with Howard Sampson gone. We don't know who's all playing on the offensive side of the football in totality to begin with. So the best thing to do for Carolina to give Criswell and this offense a chance to put up the points that they'll need to win the game is to block better for them. Because I thought, we'll talk about this here in a minute as something we'll watch in this game, but I think when he was given time to throw the football and set up play action pass and all that stuff, this was a capable quarterback. This was a guy that Carolina could win with. And so hopefully that's the way he'll look on Saturday, because it might be his last chance to make a statement as to whether or not he'll be Bill Belichick's first quarterback in Chapel Hill in 2025.
You move to the special teams really quickly for Connecticut. Really solid unit here. Chris Freeman this season, 18 of 23 on field goals. So does have 5 misses, but still a guy that they really trust. 46 extra points, nailed all of them this year. Meanwhile, at punter, Connor Stutz, 58 punts this year, 43.6 yard average. So solid. The biggest thing that Carolina has to be aware of is the return games that they are going up against. Kick returner Jaden Brown, one of the best in the entire country. 15 returns this season. He averaged 30.8 yards per return and did return 1 for a touchdown. So Carolina's kick coverage unit has to be locked in, and so does their punt coverage unit. It's incredibly rare that you see guys return punts at this type of rate. TJ Sheffield this year returned 33 punts. Now, it only went for an average of 7 yards, but that is an unbelievable amount of returns for a punt returner. In comparison, Elijah Huzzy this season returned only 11 the entire year. So this is a guy that is very aggressive. Carolina's punt coverage unit has to get down the field, and they can't get complacent. They can't just be running by a guy expecting him to fair catch it. They have to make sure that he actually signals fair catch, because he could catch him off guard if they are not careful. Let's move to the Tar Heel storylines for this game. And the first storyline is who is actually playing in this game. This has become the name of the game when it's come to bowl games, that each and every year you sit down, you look at your roster, and you try to figure out who is actually active and playing. That was even before you had the transfer portal open when it did. It used to be, okay, all these guys are going to sit out that could potentially go to the NFL draft. Now you have that on top of guys that have entered the portal, and there's a lot of confusion. Some guys are going to play in this game because they want to try to prove to other schools that there is value if they haven't necessarily gotten the amount of calls that they want to get. Others are going to sit this out because they either have a new destination or they simply just don't want to run into the opportunity, that they get injured or something like that. So I think the most important thing is that, and we'll have to figure this out as we get closer to game time, who exactly is going to be active and who exactly is going to play in this game for Carolina.
Yeah, because I think depending on who suits up for us, I think probably changes the way you think about the game going into it. Like if you were to think that all the guys that have either declared to go to the draft or entered the portal, if we were just to say right now we knew for certain they weren't playing, I think we'd probably think UConn would win the game, but we don't know. Like if Amari Hampton suits up and plays longer than just to break the record, then all of a sudden Carolina's got the best player on the field between the two teams. I'd probably lend my hand to Carolina winning the game, but none of this as of recording is known, and so which means we probably won't know until maybe an hour or so before kickoff. So enjoy writing that preview article for the website because you won't be able to tell the people who's all going to be able to play in the game or not.
Oh, I've already kind of started on it. It's like it's basically he may play, but he may not play. So it's crazy. It's crazy.
Which is why I think in this era, this world of bowl season, I think there should be a rule that if you enter the portal, like maybe you're just not allowed to play, just so fans have some clarity. Because like I couldn't imagine being a Carolina fan and traveling to Boston, which we thought about doing, like we checked into it, and then realizing X, Y, and Z isn't playing, or if you're going
poor.
pro.
Well, we're poor. That's the main reason we said, you know what? I think we're good.
But I mean, but I mean, it's just the reality of the situation. I don't get mad at these kids that choose not to play in these bowl games, whether it's because they're transferring or going pro. These bowl games, I mean, in the expanded playoff world, mean even less than they did in the 14 playoff world. So it does make it tough to preview these games and talk about these games because you don't truly know who's going to be on the field until about an hour before kick.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to see basically who's in warmups. I would not be shocked if a guy like Amari Hampton plays because he's a guy that I think really values something like breaking the single season rushing record for Carolina football. But it wouldn't shock me if he sits out. He's a guy that is probably going to be second, third running back off the board in this coming year's draft. Why would you risk getting injured in the game? To me, that makes a lot of sense as well. Bryson Nesbitt, he was pushing to try to come back at the end of the regular season. Does he look at his draft stock and say, you know what? It's probably not worth the risk of me getting injured, especially for a guy like him who has had injury problems at the end of every season that he has been at Carolina, it's felt like. So, those are guys that have decisions to make. One that really mystifies me is what is Travis Shaw doing? Because he's a guy that's still in the portal. There's no clear interest that he seemed to have. I haven't seen anybody that's been linked to him. But is he, a guy that the staff is still willing to take back? Or is he a guy that they've already told, hey, we're moving on from you, go ahead and move on? So I have no idea. There have been, people that have said, hey, we saw a guy wearing the number 4 in some of the bowl practice videos. The thing that I always caution people on with that is that we've seen, if you watch the most recent clips that Carolina's put out, a couple of the videos, I think it was a few days ago, they had a video where Bryce Baker was going through drills and warming up with the team. And they're intertwining those guys into the bowl practices. That's part of the reason why when people say, well, should Carolina accept the bowl invitation? Yes, you should always accept the bowl invitation because you're going to get your guys those extra practices and you get those soon to be incoming freshmen. They are allowed, if they sign with you, they are allowed to join the team at least 4 practices. They won't be eligible to play in the bowl game, but just getting them working in practice, learning some of the stuff that they have to learn is very important. So, that could have been Travis Shaw that could have been out there. It also could have been a guy like Devin Ankrum, who was out there in the uniform, has, similar size as, a defensive tackle, and was going through the drills, and that was just the jersey that they gave him. So that's the thing that I caution people. I noticed people pointing him out. They also pointed out a running back wearing number 4. Could that possibly be Caleb Hood? Yeah, anything is possible, but I think we just have to wait and see. Then you have the other question. So, okay, if these guys do play, how does Carolina handle the snap distribution in this game? This is a thing that we debate no matter what, whether it is a coach being retained heading into the next season. We did it last year with Mac Brown. How does he handle sort of looking to the future as opposed to playing for a victory in this bowl game? In a situation like this, it's even more complex because Freddie Kitchens is expected, or he is going to be a part of the staff. That has been confirmed by Bill Belichick. The thing is that Freddie certainly wants to win, so he wants to put the best players out there. But at the same time, it's also his job as a member of the new staff to allow guys like Bill Belichick, Michael Lombardi, some of the other player personnel guys, as well as, on the defensive side of the ball, Stephen Belichick, who will almost certainly be in attendance, to get a legitimate look at the guys that they have across the board. So, when it comes to this game, I will tell you, Freddie Kitchens, this is a great opportunity for him. I also feel really bad for him having to sort of juggle the motivation to try to win this game as opposed to, try to show the new staff what exactly is on their current roster.
Yeah, snap distribution should be giving Bill Belichick, Michael Lombardi, this player personnel department, as much of a chance to evaluate as many guys as possible. That's more important than winning the game. Would it be nice to win on Saturday? Sure. Send some of these guys out with one final win. That's all nice and dandy. We've got bigger fish to fry. We've got bigger things on the horizon. And the quicker that Belichick and his guys can continue to start evaluating guys on the roster, because they still got to weed out, I think, of a few more players to open up maybe more spots in the portal, the better. And so I would imagine that's been communicated. I think you would treat this game almost like what you would see in a week 3 dress rehearsal in the preseason, or maybe what you see in week 2, where you're going to try to get as many guys on the field as possible. Because yes, like Bill Belichick has poured over the film, but now it's going to be different because now these guys know that they're putting film on tape for a 6-time Super Bowl winning head coach who's now been given every resources known to man to build a winner at a college level. And so I know Freddie Kitchens would like to win the game. As he's going to be back on the staff as far as we know. So there's nothing that he has to prove in terms of a job security type of thing. So I think the message should be, hey, let's get as many guys on the field as possible. Let's get a look and a better feel for these guys to really help and further evaluate some of these fringe guys that will either be back next year or Belichick says, hey, thanks, but no thanks. And we open up more spots to add talent, add depth via the portal.
Yeah, I think the room that it'll probably be the most interesting in is what do they do in the defensive backfield room, because you've got guys that are trying to make it to the next level, guys like Elijah Huzzie, Stick Lane, and Freddie probably feels responsible to them to at least give them some chances out there to prove to NFL teams that they are legitimate prospects. But at the same time, you probably want to get looks for guys that are deeper down on the depth chart. Is DeAndre Boykins really a guy that can contribute for you? What do you think about some of the freshmen that came in this year? A guy like, Jaden Patterson, Malcolm Ziegler. So it's going to be really interesting to see how Carolina sort of balances that in this game and ultimately what that means potentially for the outcome. One guy that we know is pretty much going to be able to do whatever he wants in this game. This is going to be his game, is Jacoby Criswell. Carolina, they don't have to worry about a guy like Connor Harrell. He's in the transfer portal. Michael Merdinger is in the transfer portal as well. So that means heading into this game, Carolina will have Jacoby Criswell on the active roster, a bunch of walk-ons as well, and that's pretty much it. Everybody else in this room, you got, of course, Bryce Baker, the true freshman who will be competing there next year. Max Johnson is on the roster for next year as well, but certainly isn't in a place to be able to play in this game after suffering that severe injury earlier in the season. And then you do have Ryan Brown, the transfer from Purdue, who, of course, will not be able to play in this bowl game. So this is all Jacoby Criswell's here. And what this should be looked at for him is the last chance to make a statement to this new coaching staff. I don't know if that statement is, I'm here to take the starting job, that I'm going to establish myself as a leader in this race. I don't even know if the new staff is going to allow him to do that. But to me, he needs to prove that the last two games of the regular season were simply just, a bump in the road, that he is a guy that is capable of being a successful starting quarterback at this level, and that all the talent that we see, all the raw ability that we see from him is something that will be able to carry over into whoever the new offensive coordinator's system ends up being. So I think this game, more than for anybody on this roster, I feel like this game is probably the most important for Jacoby Criswell, because what we saw at the end of the regular season does not look like a guy that's going to be starting in the ACC moving forward, especially for a guy like Bill Belichick.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the most important thing. If Carolina would have went out and hired, Summerall or one of these other candidates that were very much on the table, maybe Criswell's the bridge quarterback, even if Bryce Baker, would have stayed committed or would have committed to Carolina. Man, for Bill Belichick, as much as, we're going to talk about how he has to adapt to the college game and all that type of stuff, I don't think he's wanting to build to becoming a championship caliber program. The expectation next year is going to win and win right away. And, I think Belichick and this staff are more than capable of winning with Jacoby Criswell, but he has to earn it, and he's got to look the part tomorrow. Like, if he goes out tomorrow and goes 13 of 30 for $180, a touchdown, 2 picks, we're probably saying adios. He's probably getting in the portal. But if he goes, 22 of 30, looks like the guy we saw in the wins over Virginia, Florida State, and Wake Forest, then I think the conversation would be, at the least, he's a bridge to Bryce Baker, even if Bryce were to take over at some point in 2025. But you've got an established veteran, a guy that's been around the sport, that's been around the program, that can help, the first month or so ease into the season with all the hype and all the talking points that are going to be around the program. So there's not a guy who has more to gain on Saturday morning. There's also not a guy who has more to lose than the quarterback, Jacoby Criswell.
Yeah, I mean, look, the portal thing, that might be tough just because of how the dates line up. But he could be a guy that, heading into the spring could be, third on the depth chart or something like that, as opposed to if he puts together a good performance in this game, he could be the guy that ends up going into the spring as the leader on the depth chart. I think it could also really determine what Carolina does over the next couple of weeks. Now, I don't know if a big name quarterback is going to enter the transfer portal. One thing that I know people might be concerned about is, hey, well, what happens with the Texas quarterbacks? We've seen that if, however it ends up going, one of those two guys could enter the portal. According to USA Today, players on teams competing in the college football playoff will have an additional 5 days to enter the portal after their team's season ends. So that is certainly a big deal, because if Quinn Ewers enters the transfer portal, certainly if Arch Manning enters the transfer portal, you would imagine that Carolina is going to be in on those. There are a lot of rumors that have been swirling around. And I think that's one of the things Criswell wants to prove to this staff. You don't need to hold on and wait for one of those guys. You brought in Ryan Brown. This is a guy that's got upside, could be the future of this group. Yeah, let him be the guy that comes in and competes with me and Bryce Baker for that job, as potentially with Max Johnson as well. Let that be the foursome that's competing for the starting job. Don't bring another guy into this fray. So, big day on Saturday for Jacoby Criswell when it comes to proving himself. The thing is, the last storyline, how motivated should the Tar Heels actually be to win this game? I think you should definitely be motivated. First of all, this is a guy that you guys as the players ended up picking to be your interim coach. Remember that back when there were the rumors after the James Madison game that Mac Brown was going to step away. If he was going to step away, it was going to be Freddie Kitchens that was going to be the head coach then. This is the guy that the players wanted, and they should want to play hard for him in this game. Also, you should want to go out with a win. Close this era of Carolina football out with a victory, because the fact that you haven't won a bowl game since 2019 is not a great look for Carolina, especially since you've been in a bowl game every single year since 2019. So I think there should be plenty of motivation for Carolina to go out and come away with a victory in this one.
Well, I think the more important thing is it's just a tone setter for next year, man. Like coming off the last 2 weeks where your program has gotten as much publicity as it's ever gotten because of a hire that you made. You come out here, you win a bowl game. It really sets the tone for the rest of what you're going to do this offseason in the transfer portal. They're still adding. I know they're still recruiting in the 25 class as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then really leading up to what will be the most anticipated spring practice and maybe in the history of college football. And so that's why I look at this thing and say, man, we're all hyped. We're all energetic. This is excited as we've been as Carolina fans. But the 2025 season starts Saturday. It starts now. And if you can get that, if you can get a win on Saturday and let that carry over and into the offseason program and really fuel you, who knows, it could be the first step of major things to come for this program. So, and I think there's a small part of me that would be happy for the guys that are playing, that played for Mac, that would get him a win without him being on the sidelines.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's been the biggest forgotten part about this, and I've been guilty of this thing as well. Man, in the last 2 weeks, as excited as we've been about Belichick, you kind of forget about what happened with Mac Brown and how we kind of just shunned him away. And like he basically, he's been somewhat active on social media, but I think this is a guy that even if he would have been able to step down, would have been there on Saturday and supported his former players. I don't think that's going to be the case, but, he's going to be rooting for those guys, and maybe they can find a way to get him just one more final victory, even though he's not on the sideline. So it'll be interesting. As I mentioned, I think this game means more to UConn's program than it means to Carolina's, and hopefully that's not what it looks like on Saturday, because I don't get mad about losing bowl games. I do get mad about my team getting blown out in bowl games, and that's happened far too many times in my lifetime as a Carolina football fan.
Yeah, I mean, I would hope that's certainly not the case, because with all the guys that this UConn team has lost to the portal, on top of the fact that they simply did not play well against power conference opponents, there's no way you can go and get blown out in this game. That would be a pretty bad look for this group, and could, really push this staff to take a serious look about, at a lot of these guys on this roster, and potentially turn this even into an even bigger overhaul than we originally thought that it was going to be. Let's get to the keys to the game for Carolina in this one. I think, the first key to this game is lean on the run game early on. I don't think it matters which running back is in there for Carolina. We know it's either going to be Amarian Hampton if he's trying to break the rushing record, which is if he is, yeah, let's lean on him heavy early on in the game. Get him to that rushing record and then eventually get him out of the game so that we can avoid any sort of injury risk. But even if it's Davian Gauss, that's the key to success for Carolina's offense. That's how you settle a guy like Jacoby Criswell, who hasn't played well in the last 2 games, into the game, is by using your running game. And we don't know who else is going to be active. It could just be him and Charleston French in that backfield for Carolina in this game. But Davian Gauss is going to be a guy that's going to receive a lot of carries. I think you also really want to get a good look at him. But I think to set this offense up for success in this game, you've got to be able to run the ball at a pretty high rate early on.
Yeah, these keys to the game, very easy, very simple. It starts up front. Whichever team I think establishes control, dominance at the line of scrimmage will have the upper hand. Both teams want to run the football, and both teams are going to, I think you would imagine, be committed to the running game, especially for Carolina. If Hampton plays, they're going to feed him the rock, A, to break the record as quickly as possible, to probably get him out of the game, but B, he's your best player.
Yep.
If you're really playing and doing everything possible to win the game, the more times he touches the ball, goes in your favor. So I think rushing yards per attempt, all that type of stuff will be a key stat to monitor, because I think whichever team establishes control of the line of scrimmage and can run the ball more easily than the other team will have the upper hand, just with so many question marks and unknowns about guys not playing on the offensive line and have the skill position group.
Yeah, and with Freddie Kitchens calling the plays as this year's run game coordinator, you can imagine that he feels pretty confident about the run game. And especially, you mentioned it, with Howard Sampson out of this game. Even if he was in this game, that's clearly his strength. But you want to make things a little bit easier on a guy like Luke Masterson. That's the strength of a guy like Trevion Green. Lean on that run game. Allow them to carry you in this one. On the flip side of things, you got to contain the Huskies' run game, because, as we mentioned earlier, they're a team that runs for 198.3 yards per game. That is one of the better marks in college football, and that's really what has allowed them to be as successful as they have. It's limited what their quarterback, Joe Fagnano, has had to do, and that's part of the reason that he hasn't turned the ball over as much this year. You want to put the pressure on him. Make him beat you in this game by taking away that Connecticut run game. And look, there's been certain times this year where Carolina has shown you they are capable of taking care of the run. The problem is it hasn't been consistent. They've had plenty of time to rest here. They should be, a lot of guys that should be motivated in that room to either finish their career strong, or in the case of a guy like Travis Shaw, if he plays, prove to this staff that he deserves to still be around here. This needs to be a really strong performance from the interior of that defensive line, really the defensive line across the board for Carolina, in order to slow down this Huskies run game.
Yeah, it comes back to doing your job, filling your gaps, and staying in your lane and taking care of what you need to do. They're gonna run the ball at you. They're going to stay committed to it. But this is a chance for some of these guys to really prove what they're capable of doing, and really send a message to a new head coach, a new coaching staff that is going to be evaluating that defensive side of the ball as much as anything and looking to correct it, because Bill knows if he gets that corrected, with the way that Carolina has recruited offensive skill position talent, he'll have enough talent on offense to win a lot of games his first season next year. And so, hopefully you see the Carolina run defense you saw in the 3-game winning streak show up, because no one could run on Carolina, as opposed to what you saw in the Boston College game and then the game you saw against NC State, where it just felt like Carolina was getting blown off the ball. They weren't controlling, they weren't containing their gap integrity, and they were giving up 5-6 yard runs that became even bigger, larger runs in the second half. So, as I mentioned, I think whichever team runs the ball better over the course of 60 minutes, I think has the upper hand clearly in this ball game.
The other thing that matters a whole lot for Carolina this year, really this year more than any year that I can remember, is they have to win the turnover battle. In games that they've won this season, they are +7 in the turnover battle. When in games that they've lost, they're -8. And this was a big key for the game against NC State. They lost that turnover matchup. This is a game where you have to find a way to win the turnover battle. It's not going to be easy, because they don't have a quarterback that's turned it over a lot so far this year. But the main thing here is going to be Carolina taking care of the ball. And who knows, maybe they stumble into a fumble, maybe they stumble into an interception, one that could be key in terms of the final outcome of this game.
Yeah, nope, you're definitely right. I mean, we talk about this so much during the regular season, and then you talk about it when you get into bowl season as well, especially with it being on a neutral field. Jacoby Criswell, I think, has done a really good job at different times protecting the ball, but then you saw some times late in the year as well where he'd put the ball in harm's way. And then on the flip side, Carolina's defense, when Carolina was aggressive and they could put teams in 3rd and 7s, and Jeff Collins was able to scheme up an exotic blitz or two, that defense was able to either force turnovers or force mistakes. And so, I think if Carolina can be even or, win the turnover battle, in addition to being able to run the ball at the same level or at least a little bit better than UConn, with Carolina's talent, I think that really favors them winning the game. We get bad Jacoby and he throws multiple interceptions. That could be something that could allow a lesser talented team like UConn to be able to win this game on Saturday morning. So, the thing about bowl season football is, even though the games aren't as big as the playoff games, the ingredients are still the same. Like, it really comes down to whichever team runs the ball better, whichever team protects the football, will have a really good chance to win. And that could not be more true about this game on Saturday morning.
All right, let's get to our predictions for this game. What do you see happening 11 o'clock on ESPN on Saturday morning in Boston?
Yeah, I don't really know, to be honest with you. I haven't really thought a whole lot about it because I don't know who's all going to play for Carolina. I'm going to make my pick assuming Omarion Hampton doesn't play, because conventional wisdom would tell you he would not play. And I think he's the best player on the two rosters. I think you take him away from Jacoby Criswell with some of the portal losses up front at the skill position groups, I think makes it a little bit harder of a day offensively. So I'll make it, assuming no Hampton, Carolina loses 24-21. We get word an hour before the game, Hampton is going to suit up. And even if he's just going to play until he passes the record, give me Carolina to win the game 28-24.
Yeah, I got to be honest. I don't think it should matter either way, because I think Davian Gauss is a guy that should be able to carry the ball at a pretty high rate in this game as well if you run block for him the way that you did in some of the games that we saw earlier in the season. Is he going to be as dynamic in this game as Omarion Hampton would be? Of course not. Omarion Hampton is one of the best running backs that has ever put on a Tar Heel uniform. But do I think that he can do enough to be able to run the football, for probably over 100 yards on this run defense? I think there's enough there. For Jacoby Criswell, I think this game is going to be incredibly important. I think he knows that. You're going to see a motivated player. He's going to have pretty much all of his weapons as far as we know, unless there is somebody that is not healthy, because the only guy that he lost to the transfer portal at wide receiver or tight end was Gavin Blackwell. Everybody else is coming back, or they're guys that are going to graduate at the end of the season, and so they're going to stick it out for this game. So with his group of weapons, as healthy as they've been, who knows if we end up seeing Bryson Nesbitt play in this game? That would also be very helpful as well. There is a possibility that Carolina's offense can have success, because I got to be honest with you, we saw a little bit of Luke Masterson at the end of the year. I know there are probably some people concerned that this is going to be his first start. Remember that in the game against NC State, he played a lot down the stretch for a struggling Trevion Green. I think left tackle is a little bit of a different monster, but I do think that he will be serviceable enough in there where Carolina's offense will be able to move the ball enough. Defensively, this should be an extremely motivated group, because a lot of these guys on the defensive side of the ball, I think, need to prove to Belichick and this new staff that they're worth keeping around. For some of the guys that are seniors that are going to be playing in their final game, a lot of these guys are battling to show NFL teams that they are actually worth taking a risk on. So I think regardless of who's in the game, there are going to be some motivated individuals out there. I think this serves well for Carolina on that side of the ball. And I think the fact that they've had as much time off as they have, as much time to prepare for UConn as they have, I think that you're going to see a pretty good defensive performance in this game. Ultimately, I think it'll probably be an uglier game because it is bowl season. This game in particular has produced some really ugly results in years past. I like Carolina to win this game 24-20 over the UConn Huskies in a low-scoring affair. Really quickly, let's update some of the storylines in the portal. Carolina currently with 10 commits in this portal class. You have a couple of guys that have joined here recently. Kamori House, the linebacker out of Washington, he will follow his defensive coordinator to Carolina, one of the top transfer linebackers in the class, the number 2 overall transfer at that position, according to 24/7 Sports. Meanwhile, you've got slot receiver Isaiah Johnson transferring from Michigan State, a young guy who has 3 years of eligibility left, had a pretty solid year this year. Offensive tackle Chad Lindbergh transfers in from Rice, a former Georgia offensive lineman that transferred after a few years. This will be his final year of eligibility. Quarterback Ryan Brown will be added to the mix for next year out of Purdue, a guy with a lot of upside based off the couple of starts that he saw this year. He will have 3 years of eligibility remaining. Miles McVay, another young guy along the offensive line out of Alabama, very talented young player that Carolina is hoping with more snaps this year and at what should be an easier level of competition in the ACC, he will be able to succeed. Defensive lineman CJ Mims out of East Carolina, rotational guy there that should fill the same role in Chapel Hill. Kicker Adam Samha out of Michigan, he transfers in. Did not really have a big role at Michigan, but a guy with plenty of upside that will be here for the next few years and add some competition to that room. Connor Cox, the tight end out of South Carolina, big guy, 6'6", 251 pounds, a guy that Carolina is hoping can sort of fill the role that's left behind by John Copenhaver as a good blocker and a guy with some receiving upside. Milcart Abu Jaude out of Delaware. He is an edge rusher that had a really productive season this year. They're hoping that they're able to build on that, or at least he can be a part of that edge rusher rotation for Carolina this upcoming season. And then Christo Kelly, an interior offensive lineman, a veteran that has 22 starts over the last 2 years at the center position. Carolina's hoping could be a little bit of versatility there as well for him, and he could factor in a role similar to what was left behind by Zach Greenberg. So those are the guys that Carolina has in. Guys that Carolina has lost to the transfer portal. Some of the recent guys that Carolina's lost: Malik McGowan, the interior offensive lineman, guy who played mostly at left guard this year, was very productive in the snaps that he saw. Probably would have liked to see a little bit more of him at times, especially when Aiden Banfield was struggling this year. But it's understandable why the staff wanted to roll with a true freshman there. He entered the portal on Monday night along with Tyrone Stewart, who was for most of the year the primary backup at the outside corner positions. Eventually lost that role in the lone game that he started against Virginia, ends up losing that role to Ty Adams, who comes in and succeeds. And so now Tyrone Stewart moving on, should be 2 years of eligibility left for him after he was a JUCO transfer last year. And then Michael Merdinger, that one not really shocking, especially once Carolina held on to the commitment of Bryce Baker. He's going to get up out of there. But a guy that, as we saw last spring, if you guys were at the spring game or if you just heard some of the reports coming out in the spring, Carolina was really excited with some of the things that they saw from him. The one question that I want to ask here, you look at the amount of holes that Carolina still has on this team. I think that, there are certainly some holes on the defensive side of the ball. I think defensive tackle still need to bring someone in there. Edge rusher, I think that's an area you'd like to bring in a couple of guys probably to add to that room with all that you're losing there. Cornerback with Elijah Huzzy departing and now Tyrone Stewart, probably another area that you'd like to add. And don't get me started on running back, where Carolina has brought in, a group of guys for visits. Their top 3 guys right off the board early on. None of them end up landing at Carolina. All of them have landed elsewhere. So how concerned are you about the fact that Carolina does still have so many holes and hasn't landed a lot of the big names so far?
Not very. It's still early, and Belichick is going to be picky. I think what he's adding in right now are prototypical Belichick guys that I think are going to be, culture guys that are going to set the example for the way that they prepare in the weight room, the way that they prepare in film study, guys that will get the most out of their talent, which will push the higher talented guys. I think they're waiting for this next round of playoff games to come through, and you'll see some of these playoff rosters start to become depleted, and these guys will be flocking to play for Bill Belichick because they know that he's going to prepare them to go to the NFL. So, if it was late January, I'd say, okay, we might have a problem. I don't think there's anything to worry about. This was always going to be a part of the process. With the 12-team playoff, there were going to be it was going to take a lot longer for some of the high-profile transfers to get into the portal. And I think once that happens, I think it's fair to expect Carolina to be players for the best players in the portal, which I think we've yet to see enter so far this offseason.
Yeah, and even if not, it's going to take time, guys. Like the fact that Carolina is willing to try to get the amount of investment into NIL that they proposed, I think is certainly something that you'll love to see. The money isn't automatically going to be there right away. Carolina isn't going to just pick whoever they want off of rosters and be able to bring them in. There are other teams that are, still offering huge amounts of money. A lot of the targets that Carolina's looked at, a few of the early ones, going to schools like Ole Miss, who are spending a ton of money to be able to bring some of these guys in. And you mentioned, there are other teams that are going to start having players enter the portal. Just today, Tennessee, 3 different guys entered the portal today out of Tennessee. You saw, a young, talented player out of Clemson, the edge rusher A.J. Hofler, entered the transfer portal. So we're going to see more of this, especially after this round of playoff games. And you're right, it'll be interesting to see, is that where Carolina sort of starts making a little bit more of a push to land some of these guys. And there's also names over these next couple of days from just regular bowl teams that will probably enter as they start getting closer to having to make a decision. Of course, the portal closes on the 28th. I think it goes all the way up until 11:59 at night. But once that clock turns to the 29th, the only guys that will be allowed to enter the portal after that are guys that are on playoff teams. They will have that 5-day window where they would be allowed to enter. New confirmed targets that we have, guys that will probably, if they take visits to Carolina, it would be after the new year when that visit schedule opens back up after the dead period that's currently going on. Prairie View A&M offensive tackle William Boone is a guy that I believe Carolina already has scheduled in that first week of January. You've got Utah State running back Rasul Faison that was reported by Pete Nakos over the weekend that Carolina has interest in. Georgia State safety transfer Jeremiah Johnson, another guy that a lot of big name schools are in on. Carolina linked to him as well by Pete Nakos. And then NC State wide receiver transfer Casey Concepcion is a guy that is, reportedly, according to his agency, been in contact with Carolina, and they are looking to potentially set up a visit as soon as January 2nd when that dead period does end up lifting. So any more news when it comes to the transfer portal, of course, any news when it comes to this game, we will have you guys covered. In terms of the preview, yes, it is going to be extensive, especially the Tar Heel side of things, trying to describe pretty much all the scenarios that could happen in this game for Carolina. So we'll try to describe to you, what happens in a scenario where Amarian Hampton plays as opposed to a scenario where he doesn't end up playing. We'll go through that with the team breakdowns. You'll have the team stack comparisons, keys to the game, injury reports, all of that different stuff will be there for you guys. And we will, of course, be updating you right up until the start of the game as to who is actually going to play in this game so that you know what you're going to see out there on Saturday morning when the team takes the field officially at 11 a.m. up there in Fenway Park. We'll, of course, have you covered afterwards with a recap of the game. Final grades for this season will also be out sometime within that next week. And any of the other news about the portal, the staff still coming together. Expect that news to really start to pick up here as some of these bowl games start to come to an end. And as the end of the regular season in the NFL approaches as well, you would expect that there are going to be some moves pretty quickly to try to assemble this staff. And if there are transfers that are holding out, wondering what this staff officially looks like, there could be some motivation as well for this staff to get assembled as quickly as possible once this bowl game is over. Meanwhile, on the basketball side of things, Carolina picked up a massive win over UCLA. They are back in action on Sunday night against Campbell. That will be the final non-conference game of the year. And then once the calendar flips officially to 2025, Carolina will be fully immersed in conference play. They picked up that huge win over UCLA that has changed the landscape of this season. So you don't want to miss any of the coverage that we're going to have for you on the website. Josh will be covering you with game previews, game recaps, and all on the podcast side of things. It'll be me and him taking you through the entire season for Carolina basketball with all the news that you need to know and all the reactions to all of the games that will be coming up. But for now, that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the podcast. Make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast for both this podcast and the Four Corners podcast. We would greatly appreciate that. If you're someone that's watching on the Facebook page, make sure you like the Facebook page. Same thing if you're on the YouTube page, make sure you subscribe to that YouTube page. And if you're on Twitter, watching Josh's video on Twitter, all you got to do is give him a follow. It'll let you know whenever he is going live. If you are a listener to WFNZ in Charlotte, me and Josh, or as you guys know us, Fitty and Flounder, we will be back tomorrow. The replacements in the morning, once again, one more day in place of Mac and Bone. We'll start at 6 a.m., go until 10 a.m., so make sure that you tune in if you just haven't had enough of us here this evening. But for now, we'll step away. Want to thank Josh for hosting with me tonight. Want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.